Welcome to the first social recruiting show. We're a little bit late. Apologies for technical problems. Good to know for next time. This show is going to be all about social media, recruitment, employer branding, and whatever else we decide to talk about. I'm Katrina Collier. I'm a social recruiting specialist, and my co-host is the wonderful Audrey Knight, who's also a social recruiting specialist. We come at it from slightly different angles, so I'm sure the conversation is going to be very entertaining. We are very excited that Charu Malhotra is joining us today, and I hope I just pronounced your name correctly, who describes herself as employer branding digital resourcing lead for multiple organizations. Well, welcome to the show, Charu. Great to have you here.
Hello. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Great. It's so good to have you here. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into employer branding and sort of how long you've been in the space?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me across. This is my first blab, so quite excited to be here. So I've worked in recruitment about 14 years, starting off in agency, and then I moved in-house about 11 years ago. And moving in-house were very much recruitment roles. My interest in digital was probably founded about 7 years ago when I worked at BP. And because all my roles have been global positions and the world of digital touches wherever you are, you're a candidate or a consumer, I've been quite lucky that my resourcing expertise has led me into digital and employer branding. So I always say, it's all about recruitment to start off with, but employer branding and social is where my heart lends itself to now.
Have you got a question, Audrey, or will I go?
You can start it off.
Yeah, so, I know one of the reasons I really wanted to chat to you is that sometimes, well, actually not sometimes, all the time, I find I can face resistance. And I'm sure from an employer branding side, you also face resistance of perhaps fear from management or, just hierarchy and things like that, being scared. So I was wondering if you could sort of talk through like some of the biggest problems that you've come across and, I don't know, some tips on ways around it and things like that.
So I think the employer branding point is a really good one because and I'm sure everyone on this lab, and there's about 40 people on there, it feels like, we live and breathe it. It's our bread and butter. We talk about it, we think about it all the time, and therefore the language of candidate and consumer is very natural to us. It's like oxygen, and I love it, so I don't think of it as work. But during, certainly my last role and the role before that were in sort of almost consumer organizations where, although marketing expertise is very deep, it was so fixated on the consumer that having management conversations around allowing employees to tweet, to speak in their own voice on LinkedIn, were actually really kind of tense conversations between marketing and comms and HR and recruitment. And that was sort of unexpected to start off with. And you asked about tips. So this is sort of the first example was from about 4 or 5 years ago when I worked for a massive, one of the world's biggest organizations. And they're light years ahead now. And my role was very much to bring digital to talent. And I was there 3 years. And that first 12 months was all about management resistance because allowing employees to tweet in their own voices and have a LinkedIn profile in their own voices was so scary. The first issue I faced, and I'm sure everyone in this course probably experienced it, was we must tell people what to say and what not to say. But then when we start giving do's and don'ts, people can be quite literal. If you say don't do this, then you think, well, okay, well, if the one thing I want to do that may be a bit stupid, if it's not on that list, then I'm okay to do it. So it was a great phrase that I used a lot, and my boss sort of, we kind of said it as our mantra, if you will.
Yeah.
Freedom in the framework. So I love quoting Chris Hoyt from PepsiCo. It's like PepsiCo's philosophy is don't be stupid. Don't expect employees to sort of know what to say, but don't start tolerating some kind of intelligence around that. So I think the sort of tip is a freedom within a framework. I think it's unfair to expect an employee base to know all of a sudden, here's Twitter, go off and do it. I think it's really interesting to make sure that you distinguish between work and home. But I'm a great believer, and especially, as I said, all my roles have been global, that you can't monitor what's going on in Turkey, Indonesia, China, Singapore, and nor should we be arrogant enough to realise that if I'm sitting in London or sitting in Houston or sitting wherever around the world, Melbourne, whatever, that we should know what goes on in those countries, that there's nuances to social. So I guess the first tip is trust people, give people a framework, and credit people and intelligence. And I think, for what I've learned over my time, and Katrina, you probably can support this because we've had lots of conversations, is iterative. You don't pump out a social media philosophy.
Yeah.
Go, oh, bye then. There you go. It lives in me, just like your channel does. So
Well,
question.
Oh, no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I had a client the other day, when you laugh, we're sitting there, we're training, and I'm going through it, and they're like, no, we have to run all of our tweets through the comms department before they can go out.
I had to go legal.
What? By the time you've written it and it's gone through, it's just dead. There's just no point. So I find that silly. I mean, my guideline is always just don't tweet anything you wouldn't say in front of your grandparents. Really? Used to be parents, but now your parents are usually hip and cool and happening. So grandparents, just think about it. It's pretty straightforward, isn't it?
It is and it isn't. I mean, there is a lens there. We all work in industries where there is competitor intelligence, and I have been part of the brand police where you suddenly realise that somebody as an ex-director I've said X in terms of functional. Is writing things on their LinkedIn profile about new acquisitions and so on, because there is competitor intelligence. So I think there's something around, when I talked about LinkedIn, that was a real example. And I know some businesses do this, but I actually am not a fan of saying to your employee base, be it 6,000 or 600,000, this is what you should say about working for X company. I think that your tone and your enthusiasm and your role should come out in your LinkedIn or your Twitter bio. But I know that some big professional services companies, if you look at all their employees, they say the 4 paragraphs of text about the business. Now, whether that's right or wrong is personal preference. I don't like it personally.
What do you say about with LinkedIn when management is thinking, okay, well, if we update everyone's profile and make them all really nice, then they're just going to get poached? So I feel like I've heard that a lot, where I think you should always have your employees have fantastic profiles because they're showing off where they work. But so many in management, they think, oh no, if we focus on that, then they're just going to get poached.
Yeah, I mean, can I answer that for one sec, Cherry? Sorry, I had that happen. I had a managing director turn on me and tell me that I was the reason that his staff were getting poached, which I thought was awesome. And I was like, well, maybe you have to look after them better. So I see that as the good side of social media, but I had to inject that in. But Taro, that's yours to answer, I think.
Yeah, and Audrey, I've experienced that in every organisation I've been in. It's partially fear, and it's partially a naivety. People don't stop being Charu, Audrey, Katrina the moment they come into work. You don't clock in, clone yourself, and clock out. So I think I've certainly had that question. I've had that challenge. I've had that from MDs and HR directors. And I think, it's that whole adage in terms of, you treat people well and they won't look. Someone is not going to start looking just because they've got a LinkedIn profile. And I think, we talk about LinkedIn, but it's all about all social media, isn't it? In terms of what are we trying to do? We're trying to fill an employer brand vacuum that used to be populated by a CEO video or a CEO press release every quarter talking about people are my greatest asset, bland, boring, generic, blah, 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 blah. And what we're trying to do with employer branding is bring out, this is what it looks like to work here and feel Bob the Builder's day job or the pharmacist day job. So that whole, if I do a LinkedIn profile, all is it going to be doing is creating a window into my business. Are you that scared? But I don't think, we shouldn't be so audacious and think that one conversation is going to solve that. I think it's softly having those conversations with management and leadership. They won't ever go away. And I think, for me, I've always had to remember, and sometimes it's hard because you have to go, are you kidding me? Facebook's 10 years old. You can't say that. It's sort of that softly. This is the data that's coming from LinkedIn that shows you actually our competitor are also looking at us. And I think, what we've got is a lot of data. What we're not so good at in employer branding and definitely in HR is having the narrative to explain the data. I think we're getting better at getting HR data and employer branding and using it. For me, quality of hire and how our employer branding has impacted high succession, has impacted hires and so on is important. But we don't give the narrative enough in employer branding or recruitment. But that's a different blab.
We can have another one.
Yay.
It's all good.
What if you can't even get to management because they're just too busy and you need their authorization? Give me tips on that.
Do you know, I have last year, I was flabbergasted and and this is a genuine story. And when I worked, in the last 5 years, I worked for an organisation where they had a new HR director on the board who was amazing. And she came in and she brought me in after a month and said, come in for 2 months, Charu, and let's look at resourcing and look at our team and look at our processes and capability. And within about 3 seconds after speaking to the recruitment team, I found out that recruiters weren't actually allowed to talk to management. They weren't actually allowed to talk to line managers. They weren't allowed to talk to hiring managers' bosses, their teams. So that was, a true life example in terms of talking about LinkedIn was sort of a mega step away. So to answer your question, that was how do I talk about LinkedIn when the recruitment team aren't even given the credibility or the license to talk to hiring managers? So I guess showing what the problem statement was, I have to tell you what my solution was. You have to lead by example. So I got a couple of briefs in my first week or so dealing with the CFO and the CEO, and the model was for them to talk to the person who hired me, as I said, the HR director, and I immediately said, well, that's just not going to happen. I injected myself in that meeting, so they saw credibility. And I then also did a presentation to the line manager's directorship about this is what's going on externally. I'm just going to name check again what I think is really really important for all of us to realise. And it's sometimes I, on my train journey home, have to remember that we live and breathe this. And we're paid to know what's going on externally. We need to know who's doing great stuff in digital employer branding and name check this. More often than not, the directors we're talking to, the management, to use your terminology, they're so busy doing their own jobs, and quite rightly so. That's what they've been paid to do, unless they're working in marketing. So by sharing, some simple things, and I got the 4 recruiters working for me to do the same, Googling how many jobs were being recruited for management accountants or logistics managers, just simple, comes back to data again, and I'm not even a data geek, but, just showing how bad their adverts were, because they were like something out of 1980 versus some of their key competitors. And they were in a very unattractive location. So it was very much around, employer branding might sound really fancy, but look at this advert and look at this advert for one of your competitors. Which would you apply for? So your point around what about when you can't access management? I don't think we can do our jobs without doing that. They're not this big scary thing. I'm quite like Katrina in terms of, I think, structured and honest about what you're doing and have a lot to operate. And if your recruiters can't go and talk to line, which is my statement, then we can't recruit. And I think if you kind of entice the fact that headhunters and agencies were allowed to talk to line managers, but the recruiters aren't, then it's not even a fair playing field. I feel like I've gone off on a tangent somewhat, so I'll just talk to employer branding, which is again, I think you need to demystify it in terms of when you talk to management. Often I don't talk about employer branding as such. It's much more around. I don't even mention the word candidate experience in my first conversation, because that can feel a bit sort of, what does that mean? What are we talking about? It's actually my favourite trick, and I've did this with BP in my first role in house, was so many line managers have never actually applied for a job at their company. And the first thing you do, and I do when you go and work for a new company, when you work in resourcing, talent and employer branding, but actually sitting with the HR director, sitting with the finance director, and with the hiring manager, and say, just apply for a company, and
that's a great idea.
Apply for a company on your smartphone, and then see the look of horror.
So it's more about just teaching them what they don't know, because they're just busy with their own job. That makes sense.
But I mean, even now, and I know this is again a bit slightly off employer branding, but I mean, I've been doing this at the conferences I've been speaking at, is actually getting people to stand up and try and apply. Because, if we're all going to be sharing stuff on social media, or we're going to be sending it by email, they're going to use their phone, and because they can't apply.
Yeah.
So even that makes it even more complicated, let alone they're just putting obstacles in the way with complicated application forms and you name it, and just not being very appealing. No. But I mean, one of the things I always say, Charu, as well, is that I think people need to look like somebody worth replying to. So, whatever recruiter makes the approach or the company makes the approach, like, be somebody worth talking to. Do you have any tips or tricks that you always suggest for your recruiters? It's still part of branding, but it's probably much more tangible that they can just take away and immediately implement.
Yeah, I'm just about to marinate on that question, but I'm conscious that Denise tweeted that maybe I'm better off killing myself. I don't know whether they're getting very
they wanted to come on to the Blab, and unfortunately I blocked them because of the fact I'd just love it to be yours today, and they can come on another one.
That's fine. No, I saw that, but what is that?
Yeah. There's a load of questions. So somebody's asking a load of questions down here. I need to read them while you're answering one of them.
No, that's fine. It's just I read that.
Anita's just said, "Don't worry."
All right,
Thank you, Anita.
Yeah, I would hate to have that on my conscience on a Friday night.
It would induce extra wine
for you.
Yeah, I haven't answered Katrina's, but happy to answer.
Oh no, I finished that.
So go for it.
I'm going to read this, guys, while you're asking a question.
Yeah. So I was curious how you deal with the kind of fear that, oh no, if we go on social, that people are going to say negative things, negative reviews. I mean, there's so many different ways to deal with that. I'm curious how you do.
Yeah. So I'm a project manager, and I trained in project management about 4 years ago because I really realized that everything we do in HR, it's a program, it's a project, especially in the field of work that I think in employer branding, although it's not a discrete project, you have to manage it with outputs and outcomes. So the first thing I would say is you always expect that there are going to be negative comments. There is going to be some crisis that you'll never ever expect, and plan for that. And in employer branding, I moved into it, as I said, a few years ago in one of my roles. The last role I did, I actually came out of HR and sat into corporate comms, and that was a great learning. And I think, as recruiters, becoming really good friends with marketing and brands and communications is really, really helpful and really useful because they're disciplined. But I think to your question, expect that you're going to get negativity. Expect, you're going to have some crisis. I just before this call had a call from somebody from the board who sits on corporate PR about something. You're going to have to know how to answer those, and it's having a plan in place. So I think first of all, before you do social, we're doing social recruitment, but social recruitment channels get customer service questions. My dress is too tight. It's wrong size, wrong color. You didn't come out to fix my boiler. All this. I've done it myself. I've tweeted the CEO of HSBC about an issue. Social is wonderful, but scary at the same time. So I guess plan for a crisis. Make sure that you have a very strong, structured relationship with your comms, digital marketing folk, brand folk. One of my organisations that I worked in was great fun, but also we've got a structure in where we had a call on a Monday morning to talk about editorial content with the internal and external teams across these different functions. But also we met once a month as a task force to talk about things that were coming up, new brand launches, but also things that we were doing in the digital space. So, and we also did a lot of training. So I deliver a lot of training, massively enjoy doing that, talking to a lot of different countries about training. But the first thing is, expect a crisis. This is how you respond. Panicky not, because I think there is, when I first moved into social, everyone gave you that Nestle example from about 9 years ago. There was a big issue with Nestle. Nestle responded, 12 hours. And we all know in the internet, we don't respond within an hour, disaster. But there is something about actually having the realization that you need to triage and not panic. So that the response order should be, what's my crisis plan against different issues? That whole traffic light, your issue management, and expect people are going to say negative things and have a response to them. But you cannot expect recruitment to work in isolation. We simply don't, and we shouldn't work in isolation.
Yeah, and also I feel like you can really learn from those negative reviews sometimes. If everyone on your career site is complaining that it takes 2 hours to apply, that's good to know. So sometimes I think it can be a really good thing to get those negative feedback.
Can I give a shout out to Anita Hovey, who's written the best comment here? If your worst fear is that your customers are going to say bad things about you, then I think you have much bigger issues, like why all of your customers hate you. That's pretty much what I have to say to that argument. So customers, candidates, whoever it is, we should be making it easy for them.
Yeah. And websites are so easy to apply focus group surveys on and so on. And again, that's what I did, not in the last 12 months, but I've done that a lot. I think it's then the trick is using that to actually make change. There's nothing worse, and we've all been there, to be asked about your opinion on something. Employment engagement surveys are the best. How do you feel about the culture? We hate it, and then nothing changes. think about what you're asking on the website. Again, did a massive one when I was at Unilever across 35 different countries, and the massive nuances behind different countries was fascinating. But the trick then is to plan to apply those. But yeah.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just thinking, so my earlier question that we never quite got to, but what you've just said has kind of triggered a thought. So as far as like quick things recruiters can do to improve their employer branding, because I do think it's a person-to-person game. And you mentioned the culture, and because I hate things like reach out and candidate outreach, you know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. I mean, any quick wins that people on the call could take away and go, actually, I'm going to go and do that because then I'll look better or more approachable or...
Be human. Be human. You know, I look at LinkedIn sometimes and think, you know, our industry is talking to people. When you work in an agency, and I said at the start, I worked in agency. There's good consultants and there's bad, just like there are good in-house. But be human. I love. There was a massive 47 statements and comments on Mick Sullivan's ridiculous LinkedIn update yesterday, and I love the fact that there was some recruiters on there saying stuff that perhaps wasn't, you know, corporate line, but there was their opinion. So I think be human.
What was the update? I missed that one.
Yeah, he was also about social media training. So I think Mitch is a great person to sort of provoke a challenging conversation. But I'm just saying, I think being human was nice, and I kind of had a bit of a smile when I was reading them because it wasn't the usual suspects. There were some recruiters from agencies talking about stuff. So being human. I think, being fairly inquisitive as a recruiter is important. And the reason I say that is not everybody works for a FTSE 100 company where you have a massive training budget. Yeah. So as recruiters, thinking about who do you want to model yourself against, looking at best practice in terms of, who are the 10 big companies, recruiters that you'd want to look at and see what they're doing. And again, I don't want to bang the drum about in-nails because, there's lots of people better than me talking about them. But I think looking at your profile, if you are recruiting XYZ, then say that. There's no need to say things like recruitment genie and unicorn catcher, which I saw today, and so on.
The worst I've ever seen. Nerd herder. I mean, it's like he recruits technical people. He's an in-house recruiter. There's actually about 8 or 9 of them on LinkedIn, and that's really offensive to techies. So it's like know your audience as well.
Know your audience. This isn't all about LinkedIn. Realize that there is world outside of LinkedIn. Yeah. And, you use, other channels wisely. If you're spending all your time on LinkedIn, then that's not a really good call either.
Well, on that note, I absolutely agree with you because obviously your designers are over on Behance and your techies are over on GitHub and all these other places. But I do think that if you have an unusual name like you and I do, actually all 3 of us have unusual names. So if someone Googles us, our LinkedIn profile is quite high, even if it's not the channel we're using. So it is that sort of present yourself well. Mind you, I did get told that one should drink red wine with mine because it's very cheesy. So perhaps don't model yourself on mine. Find somebody else's. Bit too cheesy. But just keep it human. I love that. So
because people trust humans over brands, right?
Yeah. And recommendations.
And share jobs. Learn the difference between a status update and share a job every 2 minutes.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I really wanted to delve into was sort of more, when you get your management who just won't give you that buy-in, they're just being really, really difficult. Do you find it comes from a place of ignorance or fear or like what's usually behind it when you delve back in your experience?
So I think there's probably a mix of, I don't want to use the word ignorance, but perhaps insular thinking. So then fear, and a lack of understanding that people are people in terms of you still have, and we face off it all the time, every day, that whole social media is, full of stuff outside of work or my latest one there, which, I'm just finding this whole, if you're pushing a business case forward because you think millenniums will do it, I can't even pronounce the word, it's not even about Generation Z, I was reading this profile this week. How do we all work? I touch my phone 100 times a day, and so do you. So on this call. So I think it's a mixture of naivety because people are fairly insular and fear. So recognizing that it's kind of the first step. Because again, you can't browbeat someone into using social. You can't force someone to go and be a social media person. I think it's around making it part of the fabric of someone's role. So you can recruitment is a team sport. An employer brand is not going to be built by me in isolation, and nor should it be. I'm a consultant, so I don't want to go. I'm not the face of X company. So it's recognizing and that mantra and getting somebody's buy-in. You can't do it if no one buys in. So I always start with either a pilot. So often I've done country pilots or functional pilots. So and that's how I've had the most success in the last 3 or 4 companies where they've been fairly not anti, but hard to persuade. You know, you're the CEO that's been there an awful long time. So I've either piloted from a functional or a country. So what does that actually mean in real terms? It means actually an ambassador and an advocate that you can have a coffee with and get to understand. And how does that play out in real terms? I'll talk to BP because at the end that's so long ago, it's confidential. I came into BP, I'm not an engineer, had to build an employer brand with a lot of other brilliant people. I was also trying to recruit subsea engineers. So kind of became friendly with a subsea engineer who'd been there for 100 years and met him for a coffee every 2 weeks. So it's sort of, you know, he's a senior guy, got him to be my advocate, pimped up his LinkedIn profile. Should I do that now? No. But, you know, at the time, let me write your LinkedIn profile for you. Then we did sort of a lunch and learn for the subsea engineering team. So kind of like start small. You know, get your advocates. If you can get people doing this for you, i.e. preaching the word, rather it's, you know, or Audra or Katrina, I think it makes much more sense. But again, people are innately competitive, whatever function, whatever organization. And when I was at a large organization where we had nothing, so this is Unilever, this is 5 years ago, we had no, and that was part of my role. Every month, me and my boss used to present twice a day about how 10 of our competitors were doing in, you know, the LinkedIns and Facebooks and so on. And, you know, I showed our 26 clicks on our career site. So again, you know, let's recognize that people are people, that human thing. People are competitive. So how do you how do you break down walls? You know, pilot high, you know, get an ambassador, get an advocate. What, you know, in the olden days, what would you call it? You know, somebody that, you know, was your friend, you know, your person. The PA of the MD who would take your call when you worked in an agency. That's nothing more scientific than that. And then really kind of start small. You know, you can start getting 20 people buying in and via a lunch and learn. Brilliant. Just so I think it's those are the 3 things I would say. And just recognizing, as you said at the start, it's sort of ignorance or naivety or fear factor. If I go onto LinkedIn, people will spend the whole time on it. You know, they're not going to do any work. Therefore, let's just ban it completely. You know, we just need to start breaking down the walls that people are going to be on their smartphones anyway.
I know I still go into organizations and like, no, we have Facebook banned. I'm like, well, what do you think they're doing on their phone? Like, crazy. But I love that idea of getting those champions and getting them so excited, and then they'll pass it on and pass it on. So I think that's really, really clever. And just finding the people who are naturally enthusiastic, because the last thing you'd want is people who aren't enthusiastic doing your social media. That's for sure.
What's wonderful now is, you know, I'm you know, we started doing this sort of 8-9 years ago. What's wonderful now is, you know, you can use a brand watch, you can use, you know, I use Sysmus Unilever, or there's amazing social listening tools, Katrina, that you did a blog about 5 months ago that someone definitely on this call should look up, because it's got 3 or 4 social listening tools on there which are free. So why I'm saying that is, I'm
all about the free. It's always about the free.
I'm about it too, especially free stuff is great, good quality, free. But I digress. So it's very, I mean, apart from the last role I had, I've always worked in sort of FTSE 50 companies, and you're talking about millions of employees. You know, how do you know who your advocates are? So you can do social listening and work out actually in your employee base who's tweeting already, you know, who's on Pinterest already. Exactly. Not so much LinkedIn, because I don't really think that's a social board. I know if our account director hears me, he'll shoot me, but it's not social. But you can use social listening to work out, you know, who's socially inclined anyway. And then I'm going to say reach out, sorry, connect with them. I know.
It's just one of mine. I'm sorry, Audra, I'm going to cut in. There's a question here I thought that was quite good. In Hannah's_news have said loads, and this is the first one I've been able to capture in the middle of this, but how do you ensure that after 1, 2, 3 years, your social media tools have delivered a realistic expectation of culture? So how do you ensure that after 1, 2, 3 years, your social media tools have delivered a realistic expectation of culture?
Yeah, actually, because I think you can't expect the platform that you put in in year one to keep up unless the people sort of have kept up in terms of the way one uses a channel has to change. And I, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn, think year one is all about brilliant basics. I also think that, I don't believe you can just do external anymore. So employer branding often feels like it's all about external culture and external attraction. But I think internal mobility and making people feel like it's a great place to work so they retain and their enthusiasm and engagement for working with the business and don't look for a new job are equally important in employer branding. So I guess to answer this person's question.
It's a good question.
So again,
who is it though? Who's hiding behind @InHarness_news? Who is that person? I want a name.
Yeah, we can do it. They said they were, but that's not a problem. So I think having said at the start, it's like doing a project. Thank you, Karen. You have the KPIs at the start of every project, and measurement is around that as well. So in terms of whether it's crisis management, KPIs, what do you want? What reach do you want? Penetrating within the company. I think also that measurement of do you want the whole company using this channel or not? And if you don't, are there other channels people should use? But I think to answer Karen's question, it's it's constant measurement, and also be unafraid to go. Actually, the channel that we put in year one, which worked for the company as it was year one. It's not, organizational cultures aren't static, so why should the channel be static? So it's to be unafraid to go, actually, we invested in X, but now we should look at something else. I don't think that's an admission of failure. But I would also not just invest in one channel. I don't think you fish where the fish are. And I love, Matt Alder said that about 10 years ago, and I quote it constantly. So expecting everyone to be on Twitter or everyone to be on Facebook, you have to invest. And I think also, I work quite closely now with communications and talent in all my roles. And thinking about internal comms is just as key. And Facebook and LinkedIn may not be right for those, but Facebook at work definitely is. So,
are you using Facebook at work?
Not yet, but we're looking at it. But we may.
I want to know. I want the gossip. So, how are you doing your internal communications? Is that good old email and newsletters, or sorry, Audra, I keep interrupting you.
No, that's a good question.
So Karen's asked a follow up. So I'm just going to go back to that because otherwise she's going to think we're talking about that. So I was coming from so she's asking coming from alignment versus areas of expertise. So alignment versus. So again, I'm going to go back to and maybe we take this offline. I don't know. So you have to align your measurements with what you want that channel to achieve. So channel isn't social nirvana. It's not a silver bullet. So I think you have to be. Well, I believe you have to be realistic. It's not, if you've got a dysfunctional culture, putting in Facebook at work or getting people on LinkedIn is not going to solve that. So alignment, I think it's just aligning with the fact that, what does your project statement and what's it want to achieve? Is sort of constant measurement. For me, whether I'm with the business or not, it's you keep measuring what's going on every quarter, every month, and so on, and be nimble and agile. That's how I would want to operate, and be unafraid of change. She's going to come back and say, I still haven't answered, and then I'm going to say,
we're going to have to take it offline, Karen. We are. But I mean, I think you've got a valid point with it's okay. Phew. We've got a valid point when you look at the mobile phones, and we want to be that agile, don't we, with everything that we're doing? It wants to be that easy. So I love what you're thinking there, but also the fishing where the people are also good as well. Go, Audra, quick, get a question in before I jump in again.
Well, I was curious more about like how you partner with marketing, because I have a lot of clients where they say, okay, we'd like to put like one job a week on your Facebook feed, and they're like, what, panicked. And there's a lot of ways I've been dealing with it, good and bad, and it's been interesting. I'm curious what you think about if you want to get in with marketing.
Well, I want marketing to get in with me, so I think it's about partnership. So interestingly, the couple of companies I worked in last actually don't have marketing divisions because, even one where you'd think there was, it isn't. So I think it's, we own our space in employer branding. And if you talk to any organization or look at any annual report, everyone says the same old rubbish in terms of talent's our greatest asset and people are our biggest enabler and so on. So if you start actually talking to marketing and getting that sponsorship, if you're senior enough, or you can broker your HR director to have those conversations, then if that truly is the case, then marketing should listen to you. Now I know that sounds really slightly flippant, and I don't mean to be, but I think now is our time in terms of employer branding. If you're working, I guess it's harder if you're working for a business that's shifting pallets, or it's not it's a B2B. Then it is a harder conversation. I completely get that. I did that last year, and it was a different type of dialogue. But if you're working in a consumer-facing business, then they can not necessarily learn from you, because I think there's still so much we can learn from marketing, and I'm learning every day and we want to know more. But I think our channels to market are both equally powerful. It's about partnering with marketing. And to your point about Facebook, in terms of, I think, for me, that the statement that Facebook's a decade old now, and there's great data about how many times people check into Facebook per country, per demographic versus a LinkedIn. And marketing divisions have finally woken up to the power of LinkedIn. It's taken them 2.5 years. When you start sharing that data, we're investing all this time, and you're really keen to talk to me, Mr. Marketing Director, about LinkedIn. Let's just open the sort of the can of worms on Facebook, shall we? So I think it goes back to having smart conversations, and I'm not saying they're easy conversations, but again, this is personal opinion, but I've always tried to create a Facebook careers presence rather than utilize the marketing pages. I sometimes appreciate it may be easy to start off that way, but I'd actually like to build my own presence wherever I be. Because I
think you've been quite lucky, though, because you've been in quite large organizations that will remain nameless, of course, where you can actually do that because they're kind of household names. Whereas I know with some of my clients who are more at the SME, and that would just be way too difficult for them, particularly with the way, Facebook makes its money from marketing. So therefore it deliberately makes it so pages can't be seen, which is fine because they're not charging all three of us to use the site, or anyone else on the call for that matter. So, but in that respect, I can understand having two, but I think on a small company that can be quite challenging. But are you doing, I assume you would then run campaigns like pay-per-click and as well, promoted posts? Like, how have you kept it in people's feeds?
So I did that last year, and again, it was a FTSE 300 company, B2B, so not sort of not consumer
not sexy,
but a good company, profitable. I think there is something around. Do you actually need then a Facebook presence? Ask that conversation internally and talking to employees. Do they actually use Facebook? But I think it is around running campaigns and showing. As I said, they were quite in an unattractive location. So in fact, a lot of their hubs were in locations that weren't seen as sexy. So actually doing things like very targeted Facebook adverts that drove people to apply for jobs or go to the careers hub with the way forward. Setting up a community or a Facebook page just wasn't relevant because there just wasn't enough volume from a recruitment perspective. And also after the first 5 or 6 people you asked questions would be answered, it just wasn't the type of environment people come and talk to. However, I think a great case study, if someone said to us 3 years ago, everyone on this call, one of the greatest, most sexy, compelling, intelligent, fantastic Facebook presence careers would be an oil and drilling Norwegian or Swedish company, we would go, are you kidding me? It'd be a PepsiCo or but go and have a check. If you go and check out what Matt Older's done a case study on, I think it's Maersk Oil, the drilling company. That's a great rendition of what you can do, what you can describe, as a real building blocks approach. So I think, it's horses for courses, which is cliche. But I think it's sort of doing a lot more targeted focus, using Facebook's power of sort of being much more targeted about gender and demographics. Not gender.
To give another great one, Marriott Jobs and Careers, really amazing. Really, really well run, and you write any comment on there, they're back with an answer, and they run like little competitions. What would you do in this situation? And Throwback Thursday and all sorts of stuff. Really cool. Another one, have a look at. Another one for your radar. Yeah.
The downside of that, though, is it's time consuming. You really have to have a person that's got a couple hours a day minimum, because a lot of times companies have 5 recruiters and they have 100 recs, and they just can't do that. Yeah. But I think it's a great way. If you can, I think it's fantastic. I agree, because then you own it. It's yours. You can do what you want with it. So it's good.
And this, that's a really great point. But I think then, yes, the big companies too tend to have employer branding experts. Or when I worked in the last few companies, social media, after we built the building blocks, we worked much more closely with a digital agency that did our 24-hour price management. But if you think about it, those 5 recruiters that you just talked about, I know that they're an imaginary 5 recruiter team, but they're all keen to develop their skill sets, or so they should be. And if you build it into, 5% of your role is this, you do a rota, 1 week it's one person, second week. I actually think people, it should be part of your everyday. It shouldn't be, I'm going to do social media. It doesn't work like that. But again, it comes back to us in recruitment, owning our space. Yeah. If someone's managing 100 recs, that's a whole different conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. We need to have a conversation about that at some point. Definitely. That is another whole blab chat. Do you have any final questions, Audra, for Charu? I think we're out of time.
Yeah, I think we covered most of it. That was really, really good. Thank you so much for all that insight. It was fantastic.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Charu, so much for being on our very, very first social recruiting show. And Audra is going to tell you about our next one. We have another one.
Yes, 2 weeks from today, we've scheduled it. And I'm going to put the link, actually, I have it here.
Yeah.
So you can subscribe now. But we're still deciding on the topic and the guest. So if you have ideas for the topic, feel free to put it over here or tweet us, either one.
Yeah, and let us know if you'd like to join in as well, because I know loads of you were asking questions we couldn't even get to because it was just going so fast. So feel free to let us know as well. Anyway, thank you guys, and particularly you, Charu, for being on our very first one. So exciting. Episode 1.
We enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.